Jesus freak here. Now, close to 15 years ago, I had this stupid idea to try to make an operating system mostly out of what was already out there. You know, Linux distribution, more or less. It felt like the mainframe versions of Unix, which, you know, Linux is very similar to Unix, but it's not quite the same. The same commands work mostly. It's got a similar look and feel. But I wanted to see how close I could get to the real thing. And while I'm not there yet, I've come up with this system here. And it looks pretty much like what you'd expect. It's got a lot of stuff there, but it's nowhere near finished. I've got some problems with getting the freestanding C compiler, which is an important part of having the system run on its own and not just sit on top of Debian, which is what I use now. Now, what's there mostly works pretty well. As you saw, I'm able to do a password check. In fact, it can actually even check it, make sure it's right. Now, it's mostly meaningless. You got better Linux distributions out there. You got BSD systems that are closer to what I'm looking for. You got Solaris, Illumos. But I wanted to see if I could do it. Now, because a lot of what I was doing is trying to make it act like the specific Unix distribution called System 5, and more particularly System 5 Release 4, although most of what I was looking at for documentation was Release 2. I wanted a name that described the project in a word. I mentioned an operating system called Solaris. Solaris is probably the cheapest, least expensive System 5 distribution. And actually, a lot of the source code was released a few years ago. Although, when the company that made it, Sun Microsystems, was bought out by Oracle, they tried to put the genie back in the bottle. So you have an operating system called Illumos, based on Solaris, and still free. Anyway, Solaris, like I said, is based on System 5 Unix. And way back then, I think 2013 is the oldest documented situation of me referring to it openly as Lunaris. But that's what I called it, Lunaris. So Solaris, Lunaris. Sun, moon. And, of course, the L in Lunaris. So I figure, it's a pretty descriptive name. I've been working on it on and off as I get bored and as I get the ability to actually work on it. Now, I was working on this originally around 2006, but I didn't get very far. I tried again around 2012 or 2013, didn't get very far then either, and didn't even get as far as I got the first time. In some respects, I've actually gotten further than I got before. The command line system is a lot more fleshed out. But in other respects, I'm not as far along. I don't have a freestanding compiler, of course. I'm using a different one. I'm trying to use Apple's Clang instead of GCC. And it's making things a lot harder. I don't have that, so I haven't even tried to get the Linux kernel compiled, let alone X window or any of that fancy stuff. Originally, I got as far as having the Motif window manager up. And that's actually kind of a big thing. The graphical environment traditionally associated with Unix is called the Common Desktop Environment, or the CDE. You can kind of, see where names like KDE or whatever come from. Actually, the CDE looks pretty similar to older versions of Windows. And that's because a lot of the work on it was actually done by IBM. About 8 years ago, the Open Group, who had the rights to it, opened up the source code and released it on the internet for free, where previously it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And people actually got it working officially on Linux, where before it only officially ran on like AX, Solaris, and actually ran on a non-Unix system called VMS. VMS is interesting because it's so different from Unix, and yet, it runs X window and all that stuff runs on top of it just like Unix. I mean, yeah, you'll have X window on other systems, but you won't have all the tools that go with it. You can run X window on Windows. I've done it. I've been doing it for years. But it's only useful to run stuff mostly on other computers if you do that. Anyway, I'm started on the project and I'm actually a good ways in, but I still got a long way to go. I understand this is one of the more technical videos, and just thought, I'd bring it up for the one or two people who might be interested. Some of the other stuff I do. Jesus, freak out.